series called Unshakable. And I want to start off, but I want to ask you a question. How many of you ever played that game called Jenga? Or you've seen it played maybe? It's, it's where you take those blocks and you have to remove one and then stack it on top, and you get as high as you can without it toppling over. Have you ever been playing that game and you're really far along and it's leaning back and forth and you're freaking out, and somebody comes along and shakes the table and it all comes crashing down? Don't you get annoyed with that? You want to smack somebody, right? Well, this whole series has been called Unshakable. And it's how we can live a life that is unshakable. We've been talking about integrity. We've been talking about faithfulness. But today I want to talk about something that can easily shake our life and cause it to come crumbling down. I'll get that one. And it's called pride. Pride. You see, pride is the I disease, right? It's when I think I'm better than God. When I think that I can do better than God. That I'm in control of my life. When I take credit for things that obviously God is the one that provided, right? Pride is essentially self-worship. Now that may sound silly, right? Come on, nobody here bows down to themselves, right? We don't do that. We don't create an image of ourselves and go, you're so wonderful, right? Some of you may flex in the mirror and stuff like that, but that's about as far as it goes, right? It sounds silly for us to talk about self-worship because we don't really do that, or at least we don't think we do. It's silly because it's self-deception. No one here probably thinks that they consciously worship themselves, but in truth, our actions speak louder than words. And our actions often say, God, I am in control. I am the leader. I am the provider, not you. For instance, when we go through a tragedy or a difficult struggle, and we grow bitter, and we question God, what we're saying is, God, you made a mistake. I could have done better. Right? Another example of pride is when we take credit for things that we've accomplished without acknowledging that God is the one that gave us the ability. He gave us all that we have so that we could accomplish it. Think about all your possessions. It's so easy for us to look at that and go, look at all that I have. It's because I worked hard, I went to college, I did all this stuff. It is because of me. I provided it. Right? But all you have to do is think back and ask yourself, who gave you the opportunity to go to college? Who gave you the intelligence you needed to go to college? Who gave you the parents that you had so that you live in the United States so that you could have the job that you have?
Amen.
Who is it? Was it you? No. You see, we can trace back everything we have, everything we accomplish, back to God. The question is, do we? Do we? Or are we plagued with the I disease? I did it. I did it. Pride's sneaky. It doesn't happen all at once. It sneaks in a little bit at a time, and it warps our thinking. The reason pride can be so destructive to our lives is because God hates pride. You can see that in Scripture. It says God hates pride. He hates it when we worship anything except Him. But He hates it the most when we worship ourselves. When we put ourselves on that pedestal and say, I did it. I did it. So you know what God does? He sets out to destroy the illusion that we have built up. He shakes our life so that illusion crumbles and we finally recognize the truth that we are not God. That it didn't all come from us. We begin to recognize He's the one. He's the one that provided it all. Now, if you're here and you're listening to this, and maybe you're a guest and you're going, what? That doesn't sound like the... I thought I was going to hear about Jesus and love, and oh man, this doesn't sound good. I understand. I understand. God does love. He is love. But there's also a side of God called justice. And He wants us to be right with Him. Right? He doesn't just love us. He wants us to be right. He wants us to be aligned with Him. And sometimes that means He's got to punish us. Sometimes that means He's got to correct us. Right? It's like this. If as a parent, here's one of my sons here. Everybody look at him. Would you just love that? Anyway, if I said I love my son, but I never discipline him, would that be true? Would you honestly say that I love him? Think about this. If every time my son, was running around and kind of just getting crazy, and I said stop, and he didn't stop, and I never disciplined him, right? I never said, I never spanked him, or I never grounded him, or whatever punishment you would use. If I never did that, so he just constantly, every time I said stop, he just ignored me and did whatever he wanted to do. That could be dangerous, couldn't it? Let me show you how. Now see, if in the backyard, if he's running around going crazy and I say stop and he doesn't stop, there might not be a lot of consequence, right? But what if we're on a busy street and I have a 5-year-old son, now he's much older than this, but let's assume he's like 5 years old, and he's running around on this busy street, and he starts to go out into traffic. And I say stop, and he doesn't stop. What happens? He's going to be roadkill, right? Because he didn't listen. He didn't obey me. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I wasn't trying to kill his fun. I wasn't doing any of that. I was trying to protect him. It's the same with God. He's not trying to be mean to us. He's not trying to hurt us. He's trying to protect us. He wants what's best for us. Sometimes we need to be corrected. So that when He says stop, we listen. Just like with my son, if I say stop, he'll stop and go, what? What, Dad? And he won't run into the street and get killed. It's the same with us. God loves us so much that He will correct us. And if we have caused this illusion of our life that says, hey, it's all me. I built everything. I'm in control. That's dangerous because we're not looking to God. We're not trusting Him. We're not following Him. And that leads to disaster. And God says, no. I'm going to bring correction. I'm going to destroy your illusion so you finally realize, you finally see the truth. I am God, not you. So how do we avoid the eye disease? Well, there's a story in the Bible of one of the kings of Babylon that went through this, where he had the eye disease. He had pride in his life, and God basically shook his life to cause him to finally wake up to the truth. And so we're going to learn from his story. I want to give you a little bit of background. In fact, I'm going to give you a little bit of background that you may not know, because it kind of goes, the Bible describes the story, but it doesn't tell you all the history. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history as well, okay? So we've been talking the past 2 weeks about King Nebuchadnezzar, right? The Babylonian king. Well, this is after he died, okay? He dies, King Nebuchadnezzar dies, and over several years, his family fights over the throne, okay? They're fighting back and forth, trying to figure out who's going to be king. Until one day, a man who was not of the family rose up and murdered the king that finally kind of got the throne, right? Kind of wrestled it away from his brothers and sisters or whatever, and finally got into the throne. Well, this guy who wasn't even a part of the family rises up, kills him, and takes the throne. Okay? Now his name was, forgive me, Nabonidus. Okay? And Nabonidus spent most of his reign away from Babylon. Okay? So he killed the king, he took over, but he doesn't stay in the capital, right? He doesn't stay on his throne. He's out away from Babylon, and he's securing the border, right? He's got his army, and he's basically out fighting, making sure everybody stays in line, right? And so what he does is he has a son, and his son, his name is Belshazzar, okay? And he makes his son a co-ruler, kind of like a co-king, right? And he puts him on the throne in Babylon, okay? And he puts him in charge. So here's Belshazzar in this heavily fortified city of Babylon. He's sitting on his throne. He's the king. He's the head cheese, except for his dad, who's out there with the army doing all the work. But he's like, hey, I'm the king. I'm doing great, right? And no enemy, and he's very confident, because there's no enemy that has ever been able to breach the city in over 1,000 years. So he's just like, man, I am so protected, I'm safe, everything's good, right? Now during this time, there was another nation called the Medo-Persians, and they had a king named Cyrus, and obviously he liked Babylon. He wanted to take it over, right? So he has his army, and he begins to make his way towards Babylon. He's going to take this city. He's going to take over. Okay? Noticing the great threat, Nabonidus, right? He sees that the army's coming, the Medo-Persian army's coming, so he intercepts them, right? Before they can get to Babylon, and he fights. Well, he's overpowered. So he withdraws, and the king, the Medo-Persian king, King Cyrus, has a straight path to Babylon. So here's the thing. Now you're kind of wondering, okay, why are you telling us all this, Pastor? It's a great history lesson. We're not in a history class. What's the deal? Let me explain. Because there's nothing standing between this Babylonian king Belshazzar and his enemy, this King Cyrus and his army. And so here's Belshazzar. He's sitting on his throne in Babylon, and when he hears about this army that's charging towards him, you know what he does? He shrugs his shoulders and says, let's throw a party. Let's throw a party. Why? Because he's not worried. He thinks he's got it made. He thinks he's in control. He's like, we have 20 years worth of food stocked up in our city. There's no way this army's going to outlast us. We're going to outlast them. Just let's throw a party. Let's have fun. And that's what he did. And he has this, he gets drunk from wine and he feels this great sense of invincibility, right? He saw himself as the greatest king of the world, greater than Cyrus, greater than Nebuchadnezzar, and even greater, and here's where he made his mistake, than God himself. And here's what he does. During this party, he decides to do something that seals his fate. Let's read it together. Daniel chapter 5, verses 1 through 31. This is what happens. Daniel chapter 5, verses 1 through 31. It says this. Many years later, King Belshazzar gave a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking the wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver cups that his predecessor Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem. He wanted to drink from them with his nobles, his wives, and his concubines. So he took these cups that belonged to the God of heaven, that were set apart for his worship, right? And he says, hey, bring those cups. We're going to have a party. We're going to drink from those cups. Why? Because we're better than the God of heaven. I am such a great king. I am so powerful. Nobody can touch me. I'm in control. Nobody can stop me. He was laughing at God. Now maybe you are in a situation where you're not laughing at God, but maybe you too feel like you're in control and you can do whatever you want. Well, listen to what God's response to him is. Daniel chapter 5, verses 1 through 31 says this. So they brought these gold cups taken from the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines, drank from them. While they drank from them, they praised their idols made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Suddenly, they saw the fingers of a human hand writing on the plaster wall of the king's palace near the lampstand. The king himself saw the hand as it wrote, and his face turned pale with fright. His knees knocked together in fear, and his legs gave way beneath him. The king shouted for the enchanters, the astrologers, and fortune tellers to be brought before him. He said to these wise men of Babylon, whoever can read this writing and tell me what it means will be dressed in purple robes of royal honor and will have a gold chain placed around his neck. He will become the third highest ruler in the kingdom. But when all the king's wise men had come in, none of them could read the writing or tell him what it meant. So the king grew even more alarmed, and his face turned pale. His nobles, too, were shaken. This party took a turn for the worse, right? This king thought he was living it up. He was like, hey, I'm so in control. Nothing can touch me. Nothing can happen. I am just the greatest, right? I am the greatest. And all of a sudden, he sees the writing on the wall. Literally. Right, that's where they get the saying. You see the writing on the wall? That's where he saw the writing on the wall. The hand, can you just imagine this ghostly hand just writing on your wall? That would be, you'd be like, what? And he was shaking. He was freaking out. And rightly so, right? Here he thought he was in control, and suddenly he's not in control. Suddenly he doesn't know what's happening. Something he can't explain is happening. So finally he brings in somebody. He brings in Daniel. We learned about him in the past 2 weeks. Daniel is a man of God. He's a prophet of God. He's also an advisor to the king. He was an advisor to Nebuchadnezzar. And now this new king calls for him. And this is what happens. So Daniel was brought in before the king. The king asked him, are you Daniel, one of the exiles brought from Judah by my predecessor, King Nebuchadnezzar. I have heard that you have the spirit of the gods within you, and that you are filled with insight, understanding, and wisdom. My wise men and enchanters have tried to read the words on the wall and tell me their meaning, but they cannot do it. I am told that you can give interpretations and solve difficult problems. If you can read these words and tell me their meaning, you will be clothed in purple robes of royal honor, and you will have a gold chain placed around your neck. You will become the third highest ruler in the kingdom. I love Daniel's response. Daniel answered the king, keep your gifts or give them to someone else, but I will tell you what the writing means. Man of integrity right there. He's not doing it for personal gain. He's like, I will tell you what you need to know. Verse 18 says this. This is Daniel's response. This is Daniel explaining to the king what's happening. And this is confusing, so pay attention. He starts out by saying this, Your Majesty, the Most High God gave sovereignty, majesty, glory, and honor to your predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar. Now you might be going, wait a second. Why? I thought he was supposed to, translating the wall. What's with the history lesson? Why is he talking about this other king? Well, there's a reason. You see, there was something that happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. Something important. You see, the previous king, King Nebuchadnezzar, he also had a pride problem. He thought he, just like this king, thought he was in control. He thought he was the one that built Babylon. And he was like, man, I am so awesome. I am the best king. Look at all I have done on my own. Right? He never acknowledged the God of heaven. And so what did God do? God said, okay, listen. He sent him a dream. And basically in the dream, God told him, said, listen, I am going to make you a wild man. To the point where he was going to eat grass. Okay? Have you ever seen somebody who's crazy? Okay? That's what this guy, he went from this guy that everybody feared and respected and looked up to now he's literally eating grass like a wild animal. Okay? And he's living outdoors. I mean, he's like you can just imagine as everybody passed by, they're like, here he used to be this king, everybody looking up to him. Now they're just like, oh my gosh, that used to be our king, They're just like, they're embarrassed. And that's what God's promising. Listen, if you don't shape up, Nebuchadnezzar, that's what I'm going to do to you. Until you acknowledge me as the source, as the authority over you, until you do that, this is what's going to happen to your life. Well, of course, King Nebuchadnezzar ignored the warning, right? As we often do, right? We ignore the warning. We kind of say, oh, whatever. Not going to happen. Why? Because I'm in control, right? Everything's good. I'm in control. And sure enough, everything that God promised in that dream came true. Nebuchadnezzar ran around like a wild man eating grass. Embarrassing himself, embarrassing his people. God humbled him. Now here's the pertinent part. The reason Daniel's bringing this up and sharing this with Belshazzar is that this was all well-documented information. Everybody knew this story. Everybody knew what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. Even Belshazzar. So this is what happened. So we're going to continue. So that Daniel's explaining, he says, Your Majesty, the Most High God, gave sovereignty, majesty, glory, and honor to your predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar. He made him so great that the people of all races and nations and languages trembled before him in fear. He killed those he wanted to kill and spared those he wanted to spare. He honored those he wanted to honor and disgraced those he wanted to disgrace. But when his heart and mind were puffed up with arrogance, he was brought down from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven from human society. He was given the mind of a wild animal. And he lived among the wild donkeys. He ate grass like a cow, and he was drenched with the dew of heaven until he learned that the Most High God rules over the kingdoms of the world and appoints anyone he desires to rule over. You are his successor, O Belshazzar, and you knew all of this, yet you have not humbled yourself. He's saying you know better. You know what happened to the previous king. Yet you are doing the same thing he did. In fact, you are doing it worse. Because that king would never have taken those cups and drank from them. You're doing even worse than he did. Belshazzar had no excuse. He knew God's authority over any king, even the kings of Babylon. And despite this knowledge, he still mocked God. He still believed himself in control. He was plagued with the eye disease. Me. I'm in control. Not God. I got this. I can take care of my life. I'm the one that's provided all that I have. I'm in control. James 4:6 says this: God opposes the proud, but favors the humble. I want to stop and I want you to look at that verse again. It says God opposes the proud. If you ever want to make an enemy out of God, have pride in your life. You ever want God to work against you, have pride in your life. Because that's exactly what this is saying. God will shape your life until you finally recognize He is God, not you. Because of Belshazzar's pride and arrogance, God was about to shake his life. God was going to begin to remove His protection. He was going to remove His favor, His blessing. He was going to begin to work against Belshazzar. In fact, He was already doing it. The army was at the gate. Now see, God could have helped Belshazzar, right? If he had submitted to God, He could have helped him, and this whole mess with this army at the gate could have turned around, right? But Belshazzar thought he was in control. He was in control. He thought he could handle it. And he didn't need God. And so God said, okay, then you handle it. You handle it. You know, so that's the thing, that's something that God does for us. You know, it's not always that even that God works against us. Sometimes He just has to remove His blessing and His favor from our life. And the enemy comes in and starts just hacking away at us, right? All because we think we're in control. That we're not acknowledging who God is. We're not acknowledging where everything that we have comes from. If you want to avoid being humble, you have to be humble. That's the message today. If you want to avoid being humble, you've got to be humble. Now I want to remind you, listen, this may sound like, oh my gosh, maybe you're afraid. Maybe you're like, this doesn't sound like the God that I thought of the Bible when I think of Jesus and love and all that. As I said in the beginning, God wants what's best for you. He wants what's best for you. And if you're not going to acknowledge Him, you're heading towards disaster. And He's going to help you to acknowledge Him. He doesn't hate you, He loves you. Just like I don't hate my sons when I punish them or correct them. He loves us. He wants what's best. He loved Belshazzar. He wanted him to have the best. But the best is acknowledging that God is God. Not him, not me. What does it mean to be humble? Daniel describes it. In Daniel chapter 5, verse 23, it says this: For you have proudly defied the Lord of heaven, and have had these cups from his temple brought before you. You and your nobles and your wives and your concubines have been drinking wine from them while praising gods of silver, gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Gods that neither see, nor hear, nor know anything at all. But you have not honored the God. Now I stopped right there, but he's talking about the God of heaven. I want to stop right here before we move on. Part of humility is acknowledging that God is the authority over me. God is the authority over me. Belshazzar thought he was the supreme authority over his life, over his destiny. He thought, hey, everything, I am in control. I decide. And he was wrong. And he learned that through this experience. He was wrong. He's not in control. Because see, all crowns of authority belong to the Lord. And he gives them, and he can take them away. You may wear a crown of authority today. You may be a parent. You wear a crown of authority over your children. You may be a husband. You wear a crown of authority over your household. You may be a boss at your work, a manager. You wear a crown of authority over those workers. We even wear a crown of authority in that we make decisions over our own life. God has given us that authority, that ability to make decisions. But those crowns are given by God, and he can take them away at any time. We have no right to boast or act like we achieve these positions of power by our own means. If we do, then we mistakenly believe that we are in control and can do whatever we want. Right? We can do whatever we want. And this will lead us directly into conflict with God. Because God says, no, I don't want you to do that. I want you to do this over here. But when we think we're in control, we go, no, I want to do this. Just like my little son, if he's running out towards the street, and I say stop, he says, no, I want to go on the street. That's what we do. When we think we're in control, we ignore God and we head towards disaster. We need to acknowledge God as our authority and the one we answer to for everything. Husbands, you answer to God for how you treat your wife. Did you know that? The Bible's very clear about that. In 1 Peter 3:7, I recommend that you read it. It says that our prayers can be hindered by how we treat our wives. Think about that, men. How you treat your wife may hinder whether God will answer your prayers that you're praying. Why? Because God's in control, not you. And you answer to Him for how you exercise the authority He's given you. Parents, you answer to God for how you treat your children. I learned that lesson. I'll tell the story. My boys were younger. They were much younger. I want to say, 10, 8, that age. The youngest was probably 5. And we set a bedtime, right? But this one night, I came home from work, and I wanted to watch TV. It was late. I kind of wanted to watch my shows. I was real anxious to watch my shows on TV. And my boys, before I thought about it, they asked me if they could stay up, right? And I had said yes. I said, yes, you can stay up. But then I realized what time it was. And I realized I wasn't going to get to watch my shows that I wanted to watch. And so I changed my mind. And I said, oh, no, you got to go to bed. You need to go to bed. And they're like, but Dad, you said we could. And I said, no, you got to go to bed. Now, I'm not saying that changing my mind was necessarily wrong in the sense of, if they were supposed to be in bed and I didn't realize, that's okay. But I didn't do it for the right reasons. I didn't do it because they needed to be in bed. I did it because I wanted to watch my shows. I wanted what I wanted. And you know what? God was convicting me, and I ignored it. I was like, no, I don't, you know what? I got like, okay, God, forgive me, but I'm still putting them in bed, I basically bullied them. Because they couldn't stand up to me. I'm in control. I'm the authority. You go to bed when I tell you to. And I exercised that authority in a way that was improper. I did it for my benefit, not theirs. So I watched my shows, and I went to bed that night. In the middle of the night, I woke up. I was drenched in sweat. I was shaking. I didn't know why. But I know better. In those instances, something's wrong. Something's wrong spiritually. And so I got up and I felt this fear. And I got up and I went to the living room and I sat down. I said, God, what's going on? Obviously something's wrong. And he began to speak to me. He says, you know what? Those children, I look out for them. And you answer to me for how you treat them. And he showed me that I treated them wrong. I was a bully to them. And he put a fear in me. It was like, you know what? You answer to me. I'm their protector. They can't stand up to you, but I can. And I'm like, okay, I get it. I get it. I'm not going to do that again. So I went to bed. I repented. I prayed. I went to bed. The next morning, we had planned as a family to take a trip out to Reno and go to this fun place. I think it was Circus. It's one of the casino hotels, but they have like fun stuff for kids. And so we had planned to go there. Well, we woke up, and I shared what happened with my wife, and she was like, wow, okay, And so we said, okay, boys, we gave him a choice. What would you like to do today? Do you want to go to Circus, or would you rather do the movies or whatever? Well, my wife and I realized we're kind of tired. We don't want to go to Circus, right? And so we're thinking movies. That's kind of what we're hoping they're going to choose. And so, but we gave them a choice. And so they start talking. They're as kids do, and they go circus, right? And I could see my wife beginning to try to push them in the other direction. And I turned to her. I said, "No, we gave them the choice. Whatever they choose, that's what we're going to do. Because I am not answering to God over this one. I am not facing Him. I'm not bullying our kids. If we gave them a choice, then we're sticking to it." And we did. But I learned this lesson that, listen, we answer to God for how we lead in those places of authority. It's not just for our benefit. We're not in control where we get to do whatever we want. We have to acknowledge God as our authority because we answer to Him. Daniel also describes another part of humility. In the next part of the verse, this is what he says. He says, "But you have not honored the God who gives you the breath of life and controls your destiny." We need to recognize that God is the source of everything. I love how he says this. The breath. He gave you breath. He gave you the breath of life. We need to recognize that God, He's our source for everything that we have. He gives us our breath. He gives us our job. He gives us our family. He gives us the house we live in. We need to acknowledge that. The money that we have, He provided that. We can trace it all the way back to Him. Now here's the thing. If you hear that list that I just described, money, house, all that stuff, car that you drive, you hear that list and you go, no, 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 I provided it. Then you have an eye disease problem. Because everything traces its origin back to God. Listen to 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7. It says this, what do you have that God hasn't given you? And if everything you have is from God, why boast as though it were not a gift? Without Him, we'd have nothing. And if we don't believe that, then we run around thinking that we can do whatever we want with what we have, instead of doing what He wants with what He has given us. We need to start looking at everything we have and saying, you know what? This is a gift from God. And I need to use it how He wants me to use it. And if you don't, if you're unwilling to do that, then let me just say this. You have an eye disease problem. You have a pride problem. And you are heading towards a place where God is going to shake your life. And more than likely, He's going to begin to deteriorate whatever it is that you think is yours and you provided, so that you finally wake up and go, no, it wasn't me. It was Him. He's the one that provided. Again, He's not going to do that because He doesn't like you. He's not going to do that because He hates you. He does it because He loves you. He doesn't want you to walk around self-deceived and heading towards disaster. To avoid being humbled, we need to be humble. Well, the king, Belshazzar, hears this warning, and what do you think he does? He ignores it. As sometimes we do. And this is what happened. In Daniel chapter 5, verse 24, it says this, so God has sent this hand to write this message. This is the message that was written. Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. This is what these words mean. Mene means numbered. God has numbered the days of your reign and has brought it to an end. Tekel means weighed. You have been weighed on the balances and have not measured up. Parsin means divided. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then, at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was dressed in purple robes, a gold chain was hung around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, the Babylonian king, was killed, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Remember that army at the gate? The one Belshazzar was ignoring because he was in control. He could handle it. Everything that he had was because of him. Well, they broke through and they killed him. The king ignored the warning from God. And because he ignored the message and didn't humble himself before God, God took his kingdom and his life. Don't ignore the warning today. Don't ignore the warning. Get rid of pride. Humble yourself before God. Say, God, I know that you are the source of everything I have. And you are my authority. You are my authority. And whatever you want, whatever you say, that's what I'm going to do. Because listen, if you don't, then God is going to begin to work against you. And I know you probably are going, what? That doesn't sound right. I keep hearing about Jesus and love. And yes, you're right. Jesus is about love. But he's doing this because he loves you. And when you run around self-deceived with pride in your life, you're going to do things that are going to lead you to destruction and lead others to destruction around you. So God's going to shake your life to get your attention.